I'm Alex, and this is episode 3 of the Astrological Chronicle. In this video, we're looking at the Mercury-Saturn transit, which is a rather short transit. Mercury makes one orbit every 88 days around the Sun, and Saturn moves much slower. This transit is now passed, so we can look at the transit as a whole. Looking at the horoscope view in Archetypal Explorer, I've placed things at roughly the middle of the transit period. And we can see that this transit is in opposition, meaning Saturn and Mercury are opposite each other in the sky from the perspective of Earth. This indicates a difficult or challenging interaction of these archetypes. They're dual, opposed. An opposition like this is given roughly a 10 to 15 degree orb according to Richard Tarnas and other astrologers. That's 10 to 15 degrees on either side of perfect opposition. The exact opposition occurred on July 30th, but I don't consider that date any more important than those surrounding it in terms of being able to see Mercury-Saturn at play culturally. At a 10 to 15 degree orb, this complex would be most visible between the dates of about July 23rd to August 8th. So Mercury is associated with thinking, communication, logical processes, puzzles, bridges, signs, maps, things that guide us teaching or transmitting data. Saturn, on the other hand, is the timekeeper, the bringing of things into being, the reality principle. It's limit, work, form, boundary, structure, duty, endurance, and tradition. So we'll look at how these two archetypes combine in a number of news events. In this first video, I'll examine some religious news. In a follow-up video, I'll examine some political news. So, onto the news. Every 10 years, Anglican bishops from across the world convene at something called the Lambeth Conference. It produces a set of calls meant to guide Anglican bishops in their ministry. This conference occurred nearly exactly within the dates of the Mercury-Saturn transit. It began on July 24th and ended on August 8th. The purpose of the conference is the planning, Saturn, and discussion, Mercury, of what those guides should be in the decade to come. At the beginning of the conference, there was some concern by Episcopal bishops that the conference would reaffirm a previous affirmation from 10 years ago that states that marriage exists as being between a man and a woman. So in one sense, we can see in this conference the Saturn-Uranus conflict of tradition versus the new. The conference invited gay and lesbian bishops for the first time, and because of this, provinces in Nigeria, Uganda, and Rwanda refused to attend. Yet, in a statement by the Secretary General of the Anglican Communion, we can hear the positive side of the Saturn-Uranus complex of a sustained effort, Saturn, for change and greater freedom, Uranus. Addressing the challenge ahead, he's quoted as saying, "We are a family. We are very different. Let us learn to understand our differences, and when there is that understanding, we can work together." End quote. And there we have the Mercurial inflection of the Saturn-Uranus complex, the addition of purposeful, intentional listening and discussion, Mercury, for the purpose of creating more liberty for all people. On August 5th, 3 days before the conference ended, Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby said the church should be, quote, "a place of revolution without violence, taking bold action against the social injustices that afflict the poor and the powerless," end quote. Here again, we have the positive side of that complex, an institution that is historically focused on tradition and conservative values, Saturn, becoming a voice and an agent of change, Uranus. Now, there was no conclusion on the disputes over sexuality, an inability to bring Saturn and Uranus together. It is a square, after all, in the sky. But there was an emphasis on discussions on the topic to better understand each other on differing biblical interpretations. Also in religious news, the Pope visited Canada during this transit on the week of July 24th and officially apologized to the Indigenous First Nations people who were forcibly moved to Indian reservation schools. Those who were taken to those schools were stripped from their families and of their culture, endured physical and emotional abuse, and thousands of children have been found buried in marked graves at various school sites. Those schools were funded by the Canadian government, who settled reparations in the billions of dollars years ago, and were administered by the Catholic Church. The Vatican, for years, has resisted calls to apologize. Apology is a Saturn-Mercury action. Mercury is the association with speaking, and Saturn is associated with seriousness, somberness, and sadness. As the Pope repents, he admits aloud to the fact of the atrocities. And it's there in the speaking aloud where we find Mercury apologizing for the atrocities, Saturn. In the same way that Mercury-Saturn is associated with discussion in my previous example, where discussion becomes a place of relationship building, so too is an apology an expression that is relationship mending. An institution, the Vatican, that is historically resistant, 3 Saturnian words there, finally speaks in a conciliatory manner, attempting to bridge the pain. The Uranian aspect of this may be the liberation from a more intense conflict to a lesser conflict. However, understandably, some remain pessimistic and critical of the apology. This is also Mercury-Saturn. Here, the reality principle says that an apology does not fix anything real because it does not provide material repayment for those horrors and abuses. In the next video on Mercury-Saturn, we'll look at a few political events that are indicative of and occurred within the Mercury-Saturn transit. That's it. I'll see you there.